thy soul shall find itself alone, mid dark thoughts of the grey tombstone, not one of all the crowd to pry into thine hour of secrecy. Be silent in that solitude, which is not loneliness, for then the spirits of the dead who stood in life before thee are again in death around thee, and their will shall overshadow thee. Be still. The night, though clear, shall frown, and the stars shall not look down from their high thrones in the heaven, with light like hope to mortals given. But their red orbs without beam to thy weariness shall seem as a burning and a fever which would cling to thee forever. Now are thoughts thou shalt not banish, now are visions ne'er to vanish. From thy spirit shall they pass, no more, like dewdrop from the grass. The breeze, the breath of God is still, and the mist upon the hill, shadowy, shadowy, yet unbroken, is a symbol and a token. How it hangs upon the trees, a mystery of mysteries.
The year was 1829. The sleepy town of Newcastle, Massachusetts, was bearing the brunt of a particularly harsh winter snowstorm. Mary Brown had just turned sweet 16 and was sitting down for a humble supper with her family, thanking the good Lord for sparing their house in this harsh weather and providing them with enough food. All were in a festive mood. Then the unexplainable happened. Before Mary even took her first bite, her entire body went into violent convulsions. She started choking. Her parents tried to save her, but to no avail. Mary was dead within minutes. 6 weeks to the day after Mary's mysterious death, the Browns awoke early in the morning to loud knocks on their door. It was Mary's best friend, Sarah. In a panic, she told the couple that she'd just seen Mary floating down Main Street, her toes inches from the ground. Mary's ghost was smiling and laughing, said Sarah, as it aimlessly roamed about town. In the following days, many similar stories were heard around Newcastle. The Browns, who had rapidly aged from their grief and misery, soon became very ill, and both died just a single day apart. The Brown extended family, 21 of them, were a mainstay in Newcastle, simple farmers who've lived there since the inception of the town. Over the following year, they had all mysteriously started getting very ill. Then, one after the other, all of them, with the exception of Peter, a distant cousin, had died. Without exception, all the bodies had horrible teeth marks on their necks, though no blood was apparent. The townspeople knew that the spirit of Mary, still roaming about, was involved. Rumor had it that some members of the Brown family awoke in the middle of the night to see Mary standing over their beds, grinning down at them before throttling their necks in a death grip and sucking for blood. The people of Newcastle were at a loss. Jeremiah Buckner, the notorious witch hunter and vampire expert from Salem, the next town over, was summoned in a last-ditch effort to end the horror. After meeting with the town elders, he set up a rendezvous for the following week, on the very day Mary had died 1 year earlier. The day had arrived. The clock struck midnight. Jeremiah, the elders, and Peter, now horribly ill, all gathered at the town cemetery gate. Peter could barely hold up his frail body. Everyone was expecting him to die within days, as the violent and horrifying pattern of the Browns indicated. The ritual they were about to perform that night was not for the faint of heart. As they arrived at Mary's grave, they started slowly digging until the coffin was unraveled. The elders were not prepared for what they would see next. Opening the coffin, they found Mary looking much like before she had died. Her flesh was pink and full of life, her hair and fingernails grown, and her lips were full and red. Jeremiah then poked her chest with his pocket knife. Mary bled. This was not by any stretch of the imagination an ordinary dead body. Jeremiah then proceeded to cut open her skin, reached in, and pulled out her bloody heart. Just at that moment, Peter gasped in relief. His body felt rejuvenated. It seemed his mysterious illness had all but disappeared in a matter of seconds. From that moment on, the sightings of Mary completely vanished. Peter, his health regained, would soon marry and have 3 children. The Brown family bloodline was once again revived. Though the town of Newcastle was now back to normal, to this day, its residents claim to see the ghosts of the dead Browns floating about with blank stares in their eyes.
It was a dismal night, wet and thundering. A loud, crashing noise startled Annie as she sat alone watching television. Shrugging it off, she returned to her show. Just then, the phone rang. Annie had been expecting a call from the parents of the 2 children she was babysitting. So she quickly answered the phone. "Parker residence." There was not a word from the other end of the phone. "Hello? Is anyone there?" repeated Annie. Just as she was about to lay down the receiver, a man's voice strangely asked, "How are the children?" Annie inquisitively replied, "Excuse me?" The creepy voice repeated, "How are the children?" Annie was puzzled, but not alarmed. "Who is this? Mr. Parker? Is that you?" Silence. The voice disappeared as the sound of the phone hanging up was heard through the receiver. Annie put the phone down and walked toward the dark hallway to the foot of the stairs. She looked up the side of a steep banister to the open door of the children's room, pondering whether or not she had left it ajar. Just as she started up the stairs to check on the children, the phone rang. She picked up the receiver. "Hello?" There was no sound but the sound of her own breath. Annie spoke again. "Who is this?" Silence. Suddenly, the frightening voice was heard again. "Do you know how the children are?" Annie hung up the phone and dialed the police. The officer assured her that it was probably nothing more than a prank. But as a precaution, the police ran a trace on the call. Annie was slightly apprehensive. She was fidgeting and pacing back and forth in the hallway. From the living room came noises from the TV. Annie stared at the phone. She tensely walked past, watching it. She began checking windows and doors throughout the house to make sure they were locked. As she turned on a light perched on a table, She jumped at the sound of the loud ringer of the phone next to the light. Her eyes widened as her fist tightened. She slowly reached for the receiver, then picked it up quickly. Forcefully she spoke. "Listen, you! I've already called the police, so stop calling here." Annie was about to slam the phone down when she heard the shrill sound of laughter echoing through the receiver. Annie yelled into the phone, "Who are you? What do you want?" The voice replied, "I've already got what I want. Check the children." Annie slammed down the phone. She ran through the dining room to the study, continuing to check the windows. Suddenly, Annie stopped and shrieked at the sight of a face staring through the window in the study. It was a man with piercing black eyes like the eyes of a shark, sinking his teeth into his victim. She jumped back from the window and ran out of the room through the house to the front door. She flung open the door and gasped. A giant figure loomed over the doorway. He grabbed her by the arms. She struggled to push him away. It was Officer Dow. Annie finally realized who it was and calmed down slightly. She hysterically led him back into the house, crying about the face in the window. Dow instructed his partner, Officer Keefe, to check the upstairs. Annie showed Dow the window where she saw the man's face. Dow inspected the windows and hesitantly told her, "Annie, I'm afraid the calls were traced to a line inside the house. We came as quickly as possible." Pausing before finishing his bad news, Dow continued, "This glass is tinted. What you saw was not a man looking through the window, but a man's reflection in the glass." Annie shook her head in horror. "Do you mean he was behind me?" Just then, Officer Keefe yelled from the upstairs for Dow to come quickly. Dow told Annie to stay put, but she refused to be left alone and chased him out of the kitchen. Slowly, Dow walked up the long flight of stairs. His flashlight lit the path as Annie followed closely behind. They walked into the bedroom. Dow flashed the light throughout the room. Annie flipped on the light switch. Annie's painful screech sounded like an alarm. The children's beds were empty and the sheets were pulled off. Officer Keefe came running into the room and announced, "I've searched the house. There's nobody here." Annie turned to him, horrified by this news, and asked, "What about the children?" Keefe replied, "They're gone. It's been 10 long years now, but the children have never been back."
Little Amy was only 9 years old when her Uncle Stanley died. It was difficult for her to cope with this terrible death, as she spent most of her summer vacation days with her loving uncle. Amy's father had always worked long hours, and Uncle Stanley was the father figure in her life. Stanley, who'd been divorced for quite some time, had no children, and Amy was his only salvation from a lonely existence. He was buried in the cemetery just 2 blocks up from her house, and she would go visit his grave every day, sometimes more than once. It was on a particularly hot August night when Amy's parents had prepared to go out to a fancy restaurant across town. Both being hard-working professionals and leading a busy life, they felt they'd owed themselves this rare treat. They were running late to make their 8 o'clock reservation. Paul, Amy's older brother, was scheduled to show up at 7:30 to babysit Amy, but had not yet arrived. Seeing that her parents were running late, Amy assured them that she would be fine waiting by herself. She then hurried them to go out and have a good time. They both kissed her goodbye and drove off. Amy was so involved playing with her dolls that she hadn't noticed how fast the time was flying by. Paul had not yet arrived. As the big chime clock in the living room struck 11, distant thunder was heard. Amy began to be scared. This unlikely summer storm was growing louder and mightier by the minute. She took her dolls with her and ran to her parents' bedroom and pulled the blankets over her head. She lay there shivering when suddenly a deafening thunderclap exploded and a brilliant lightning flash illuminated the whole house. The power in the house went dead. Amy picked up the phone receiver to try and call her parents' cell phone, but the phone line was dead as well. The following minutes were eerily quiet. Nothing was heard but the wind blowing in the trees. Amy started crying. Then, To her surprise, the phone rang. Hoping it was either her parents or her brother Paul, Amy hurriedly picked it up. "Hello?" she said in a shaky voice. The line still seemed dead. Had she just imagined the phone ringing seconds earlier? "Hello, Mom?" she asked again. Then, sounding faint and distant, a familiar voice was heard over the phone line. It was Uncle Stanley's voice. "Do not leave the house, Amy. You'll be safe if you stay right here. Don't be afraid, I'm watching over you." The phone then went silent again. The storm raged on unabated, but Amy slept peacefully. Early the following morning, Amy was awakened by her brother Paul. As he picked her up off of the bed, she could see through the bedroom window the neighborhood was demolished. All the surrounding houses had been destroyed by the vicious storm. Paul explained that his car had broken down and he'd been stuck on the highway for most of the night. He said that he had some bad news. They would never see their parents again. He told her they were both killed in a horrible car accident on their way home. "It's a miracle you survived the storm," Paul said with tears in his eyes. Weeping uncontrollably, Amy choked out her story of the strange phone call she'd gotten from Uncle Stanley. Paul comforted his little sister, but suspected she was in a state of shock. And yet, as they were walking out of the house, he looked up and noticed something strange. The phone line from the house was entirely intact out to the first pole on the street, but then it dropped at an angle, continuing straight into the cemetery. The end of the broken line was wrapped around the tombstone at Uncle Stanley's grave.
Ronnie had wanted to date Cindy since seeing her cheer for his football team freshman year. They both went to Jefferson High. Cindy was always dating somebody, but finally agreed to go out with Ronnie. Ronnie took her to the movies to see a sultry romantic love story, hoping it would turn Cindy on. It worked. Ronnie wanted to make sure they would be alone, so he parked his truck off the road by the woods. All the other kids would surely be parked at the crest, an inn overlooking the cliffs. The radio was playing slow love songs. Things really heated up. They rolled around on the seat, kissing and groping each other. In the heat of the moment, Ronnie yelled out, "Ashley! Ashley!" Suddenly, Cindy was quiet. She pulled down her shirt and abruptly sat up. "What's the matter?" Ronnie asked in a breathy voice. Cindy did not reply. Instead, she adjusted her shirt, then sat with her arms crossed. "What's wrong?" Ronnie asked again. "What's wrong?" yelled Cindy. "You just called me Ashley. That's what's wrong, you jerk." Ronnie attempted to put his arms around Cindy, but she pushed him aside. Cindy started fidgeting with the radio, changing the station. Ronnie tried to explain, but Cindy wouldn't listen to him and insisted he drive her home. Cindy stopped pressing the buttons to the radio when she heard the voice of an announcer reading an urgent bulletin. "A convicted murderer has escaped from McLean Hospital for the Criminally Insane. The man was injured in a high-speed car chase that resulted in the mutilation of his right arm. A temporary hook had been attached to his right arm. This hook will make him easy to identify. Please be advised, he is extremely dangerous." Ronnie turned off the radio immediately, hoping this news would send Cindy flying back to his arms, forgetting about what he had accidentally muttered. Cindy was terrified. She was panicking and crying for Ronnie to get them out of there immediately. Ronnie tried to convince her that nothing was going to happen to them. Cindy would not change her mind. She locked her door and then reached over to Ronnie's side of the car to lock his door. Just as she did, they heard a loud thud on the passenger side of the truck. Ronnie slammed the gear into drive and flew out of there. Cindy was screaming for Ronnie to drive faster, faster, get us out of here. Cindy clung onto Ronnie's arm all the way home. As they got closer to Cindy's house, they had both begun to calm down. "Listen, Cindy," Ronnie said, "I'm really sorry about what I said when we were, making out and stuff. The truth is, I really like you a lot. I was just nervous, and you know how guys are. Stupid." Cindy smiled at this remark as he continued, "I promise it'll never happen again." Cindy looked at Ronnie skeptically. He took her hand and sweetly kissed it. Cindy smiled. Ronnie attempted to sweet-talk her some more. "Cindy, give me another chance. I'd love to take you out again. And this time, no deserted roads. Maybe we can get a little dinner or something." Cindy smiled and gave Ronnie a kiss on the cheek. She leaned back to open her door when Ronnie stopped her. No, allow me. Wait right there." Ronnie jumped down off the truck and walked around to Cindy's side. Cindy was fixing her hair and checking her makeup in the rearview mirror when she noticed Ronnie was just standing outside her door. She looked up at him and motioned, "What's the problem?" Then she realized her door was locked. Laughing to herself, she unlocked the door. Ronnie still did not open the door. Cindy rolled down the window and leaned out. Ronnie's face was white. He just stood there staring at the door handle. Cindy looked down at the handle. A long splatter of blood was smeared across the door, all the way back to the bumper. Hanging from the door handle was a stainless steel hook.
Jim Wilson had just wrapped up a grueling business meeting. It did not go well. He had been on the road for over 3 weeks now, trying to earn his Salesman of the Year award and a much-needed cash bonus. Jim needed a drink. A few drinks, as a matter of fact. He rushed downstairs to the hotel lobby and finally exhaled as he entered the lounge. "Gin and tonic, my man, and please don't spare the alcohol," he exclaimed to the bartender. Just as Jim took his first sip, he felt a tap on his shoulder. "Do you mind if I join you?" a sultry voice whispered in his right ear. Jim turned around to find in front of him an angel. Dark, shapely, gorgeous, and with a pair of pouty lips that could not be denied. Maybe this day is not so bad after all. Jim slowly slipped his wedding ring into the pocket of his pants and offered the woman a seat next to him. "I'm Jim. What's your name, gorgeous?" "Angel," she replied. "How perfect is this?" Jim thought to himself. Angel looked sad. Jim kept chugging down his gin and tonics as if they were water. Angel began to tell him of her brother who lives in her native country of Colombia. He is in the hospital and has been waiting for a kidney transplant for 6 months now, but to no avail. As a tear rolled down the side of her face, she turned to Jim and said, "He only has a week to live." Just as Jim sipped his 12th drink, Angel asked, "Would you like to take a bath together?" Jim, shocked, paused for a quick second, then said with a silly grin on his face, "Why, I'd be delighted to." Excited, Jim slammed down the rest of his drink, and the two rushed up to his room. Getting in the bathtub is the last thing Jim remembered before waking up early the next morning. He was still in the bathtub, his body, completely submerged in ice from the neck down, felt completely numb. A phone was placed next to him on top of the ice. As he looked up, he saw a big note with the following instructions written in lipstick. "Do not move. Call 911 for an ambulance now." Jim, who could not move anything but his hands, knocked over the phone handset, pressed the speakerphone button, and immediately dialed 911. An ambulance arrived within minutes. The medics carefully pulled Jim out of the bathtub and gasped in horror. "Have you recently had a surgery, Mr. Wilson?" the medic asked. "No," replied Jim. "Why do you ask?" The medic reached behind Jim and pulled a tube which was protruding from his lower back. As they turned Jim around, the medics' faces were as white as the wall behind them. The scene was bloody. One of the medics, in shocking disbelief, fell to the floor and passed out. Jim's back had been cut wide open. The other medic, barely holding on to consciousness, said in a faint voice, "Mr. Wilson, your kidneys are gone."
Muriel lived alone in an old Victorian house overlooking the rocky coast of Maine. She had grown lonely in her old age and relied heavily on the comforts of her Newfoundland, Misty. Misty had taken to sleeping under Muriel's antique canopy bed, and because of the bed's height, his furry body just fit underneath. All his treasures awaited him beneath the metal springs: bones, toys, biscuits, and riches of all kinds. Muriel catered to his very fanciful whims, as she had no children to love. Every night, before going to sleep, Muriel would take down her long gray hair and brush each strand over and over again until it shines like the moon, she would say. Misty would sit below her with his head peering out from the bed. After she brushed her own hair, she would take the doggy brush from the bedside table and brush Misty's bushy locks. Misty would fall asleep every night as she performed this ritual. Every morning, Muriel would wake and put her hand underneath the bed. Misty would greet her with a gentle lick on her hand, and Muriel would know that she was safe. Nobody visited Muriel except for the occasional postal worker and paper boy, though she had recently taken to listening to the radio for news stories, as her eyes grew weaker and weaker with age. One particular night, Muriel could not sleep. She awoke to a dreadful sound. Drip, drip, drip. This monotonous noise continued to keep Muriel from her dreams. She rose from her bed and went to the bathroom to check the faucets. One faucet appeared to have a slight leak. She turned the knobs tightly, then returned to her bed. The next morning, Muriel put her hand under the bed, as she did every morning. She felt Misty's strong tongue lick her hand. As she got up, she began talking to Misty as she often did, reciting the coming events for the day. Muriel put on her bathrobe and slippers and walked slowly down the curvy velvet-covered staircase to her kitchen. As she walked, she heard the familiar noise of her leaky faucet. Drip, 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 over and over again. As she approached the kitchen, the noise got louder. Drip, drip, drip. She turned on the light switch. Hanging by his tongue from the light fixture was Misty. His blood was dripping onto the floor. Drip, drip, drip. And there on the wall, scrawled in blood, was a message. Misty's not the only one who fits under your bed. Ed was extremely fond of his grandmother, Mabel, who had raised him after his parents died when he was 8 years old, but she was worried about him. She knew that he was too young to be spending all of his time with books and an old woman. Mabel prayed every night for a companion for her grandson, for she did not want to leave her Eddie alone on the earth. One morning, Ed awoke to the clamor of pouring rain outside his window. He bundled himself up, kissed Mabel goodbye, and left for the bookstore. Returning home that evening, he decided to take an alternate route to avoid the mudslides from the cliffs. As he drove, he spotted a young woman standing soaking wet at a bus stop. Ed offered to give her a ride home. She got into the car and shook off her long black hair that was dripping from the rain. "My name is Louisa," she said. She was exquisite, a raven. This nymph who had fell upon his arms enchanted Ed. They drove and talked and laughed and fell madly in love. Every day for 2 weeks, Ed would pick Louisa up at the bus stop and drive her home. Ed was completely changed. His amorous affections brought him new light. Ed was so in love that he decided he would bring Louisa home to meet his grandmother. That evening, when he got to the bus stop, she was not there. Puzzled, he drove to the house he had been dropping her off at for 2 weeks. He knocked on the door. An old woman answered in a tired voice. "What do you want?" Ed introduced himself as Louisa's Ed, the man who had been driving her home the past 2 weeks. The woman was startled, but invited Ed in the house. She invited him to sit and offered him a cup of tea. Ed asked if Louisa would be returning soon. The old woman showed Ed a picture. It was in an old frame, and the picture looked somewhat outdated. A beautiful young woman was riding a horse. "How ravishing Louisa looks!" exclaimed Ed. The old woman laid the picture down on a table and sat across from Ed. "Yes, she was very beautiful," the old woman said sadly. "What do you mean was?" questioned Ed. The old woman asked how he had met Louisa. Ed happily told her his story of rescuing Louisa from the bus stop on a rainy night. The old woman's face went blank. She put her tea down and carefully picked up the picture of Louisa. Staring at the picture, she told Ed in a crackling old voice. "It was a rainy night. Louisa was waiting for the bus, when all of a sudden, a car came skidding around the corner, out of control." The old woman paused and drew in a deep breath. She was killed that night, 30 years ago. Audrey and Jill were college students. The summer before their junior year, the girls had decided to rent a cottage together on a secluded island. A number of their friends from college were doing the same. They found an adorable little cottage nestled in a wooden area. Each cottage had a sign over the door. Their sign read, "Comfort Cottage." They got themselves waitress jobs at a local inn and spent the rest of their time partying and relaxing on the beach. Audrey's motive for escape was not as simple as Jill's. Audrey and her boyfriend AJ had decided to call it quits. Audrey did everything she could to rid her mind of AJ, but it was hopeless. She was still in love. Apparently, AJ felt the same way. He called Audrey and asked her if he could come onto the island for the weekend. He had gone home for the summer, but would fly into the city if she would come meet him and escort him back to the island. Audrey agreed. As Audrey was packing, Jill returned to the house with a dreadful sunburn. Audrey yelled in shock as she saw Jill's red, blistered body walking painfully up the wooden stairs of the cottage. She rushed to help Jill lie in the bed. Jill seemed relieved just to be off her feet. As Audrey applied the ointment over Jill's burnt body, she told her about her phone call from AJ. Audrey was hesitant to leave Jill in such a state, but Jill insisted she would be fine. She was simply going to go to sleep. Audrey reluctantly left, assuring Jill she would be back first thing in the morning to check on her. Audrey got in her car and drove off down the dirt road. The ferry was about 3 miles from their cottage, and she was already running late to catch the last one. Halfway to the ferry, Audrey realized she had left her asthma medicine back at the house. She thought for a moment, then decided she must go back for it. She drove as quickly as she could through the dense fog on those rocky cliff roads. When she got to the house, all the lights were turned off. Not wanting to disturb Jill, she quietly tiptoed into the house, leaving the lights off. She made her way to the bathroom and grabbed her inhaler and medicine. As she was leaving the house, she stopped. She sensed something. She reached over to turn on the light, but could not find the chain to pull. A small thud sounded as she knocked over a book from a table. Cursing to herself in whispers, she then paused for a moment and listened. Nothing. Deciding all was well, and not wanting to wake up Jill, she quietly hurried out the door. Audrey and AJ had an incredible night together and decided they had been foolish to break up. The next morning, Audrey insisted they catch the 6 a.m. ferry so they could get back to check on Jill. Audrey was worried about Jill's sunburn. She bought a bag full of ointments, a couple of fashion magazines, Jill's favorite junk food, and headed back to the cottage. As they got out of the car, Audrey noticed something strange. The Comfort Cottage sign had fallen off the door and was lying face down at the foot of the stairs. Audrey quickly walked up the stairs toward the door. AJ flipped over the sign. There were bloody handprints all over it. AJ examined it, not knowing what it was. Then realizing, he yelled to Audrey, who had already entered the house. A blaring screech sounded from the house. AJ ran up the stairs and threw open the screen door. He rushed through the house to the bedroom to find Jill's slain, bloody body strewn across the bed. Her sunburned arms were tied to the bedpost. AJ frantically yelled for Audrey. He ran into the bedroom to where Audrey was slumped over the sink she had just thrown up in. On the bathroom mirror, written in blood, were the words, "Just be glad you didn't turn on the light."
Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this, and nothing more. Distinctly I remember, it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow. Sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden whom the angels named Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now to still the beating of my heart I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door, some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore, but the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door, darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there, wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore." This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word Lenore. Merely this and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping, somewhat louder than before. Surely, said I, surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see them, what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more. Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady, perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird, beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou, I said, art sure no craven, ghastly, grim and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Much I marvelled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculpted bust above his chamber door, with such name as nevermore. But the raven, still lonely on that placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing further then he uttered, not a feather then he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, other friends have flown before, on the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by replies so aptly spoken, doubtless, said I, what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whose unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore, of never, nevermore. But the raven, still beguiling all my fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of bird and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking nevermore. Thus I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining, with the lamplight gloating o'er, she shall press, nevermore. Then methought the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee respite, respite and nepenthe from my memories of Lenore. Quaff, oh quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempter sent, or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate, yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, profit still, if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aidenn it shall clasp a sainted maiden, whom the angels named Lenore. Clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels named Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign in parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked, upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted